our January special meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission, Tuesday, January 20th. And roll call, you can see that all of our commissioners are present. So there's a special meeting. We do have a limited agenda, but just for the sake of our viewers out there, do I have an approval of the meeting agenda?
Oh, I move we accept the agenda as written.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passes. And then if you've had a second or need to take a second to read the meetings of our November minutes of our November meeting and entertain a motion to accept.
Move to approve.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
It's passed. All right, so next item on our agenda is Megan Duvall. So thank you, Megan, for coming and attending our meeting. And I think we've had conversations. If you're aware, the city created a CLG. We've been a commission for quite a number of years. We do have 2 properties so far in our local register.
Okay.
We're trying desperately to get 3 or 4 this year. It's kind of our goal.
Great.
We've done some smaller projects, grants and things over the years. I would say that we've had issues with raising awareness of the commission and some of the things that we could provide. We've developed a resource guide for historic property owners that's on the website. We have printed copies here. We've done some board skills. You know, we had Katie come in from Vernacular, I think a few years ago, to do some board training and help us get our forms in place. So we've had that set up. But we've also had issues just, you know, getting community involvement and support. And one thing that we've had a city council member express interest in is looking into doing an overlay district of our historic district, because we have kind of limited interest in property owners, and how might we be able to protect our historic resources by putting an overlay district, which I know that the city of Spokane has a couple of those. So those are just things that we would love to get your thoughts.
Well, you'll certainly get the community interested if you start down the road of a historic district created through an overlay, for sure. I think people will start to pay attention.
Want to get involved.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, one way or the other. So just to kind of give you a little bit of background in Spokane, I mean, we've had a historic preservation ordinance since 1981. And Spokane works with Spokane County, so unincorporated Spokane County is also part of what we cover. So that's why I'm actually not sure why the Rosebush House, maybe it's just on the National Register. I think
National and the state and the local.
It is on the Spokane Register. Or the Millwood Register. Okay, that's what I meant to look at that before. I know it's on our website, like we show it, but probably just because it's in the county. But we do have like the Historical Society in Spokane Valley, City of Spokane Valley, is on the Spokane Register, but that was when it was unincorporated, and so once it incorporated, we've sort of, you know, we don't really regulate that property anymore if they had changes or whatever. But so for a long time, we really didn't have a good way to make historic districts. You know, in Spokane, we every time a property is listed, we actually put together a contract between the property owner and the city or the county, whichever it's being listed in. That's called a management agreement, which is a great way to actually sort of make it a contract between the owner and the government, and it keeps it basically in everyone's public eye from that time forward. We record it with the county assessor or the auditor's office, I'm sorry. So it's part of the title. So like if somebody buys that property in the future, you know how you have to put your initials on 1,000 pages when you purchase a property? One of those would be a notice of that management agreement. So it'd be very hard for somebody to say, well, I had no idea that that I was purchasing a historic property, you know, that kind of thing. So that management agreement is great for individual properties, but it made it much more difficult to create historic districts, as you can imagine, because there really wasn't a provision for how do you, you know, draw a boundary and have properties within those boundaries agree to it. We just didn't have that in our ordinance. So we did have a couple small historic districts, like 4 properties. Well, that's easy. You can get those management agreements signed when the district is literally 4 properties. But there's one larger district, which was the Corbin Park neighborhood. So if you're familiar with Corbin Park in Spokane, it was 88 properties that surrounded the park. And it was done in the mid-90s. So at that time, it still was almost all owner occupied, you know, no, hardly any rental properties in there. So what they did was they literally just wrangled their neighbors. I think at the time that only 2 people didn't sign that management agreement because they still were using that as sort of the basis to list properties, even in a district. Everybody had to agree. You can imagine. You can't have a real historic district if you allow people to not participate, because the people that you really want to probably control and make sure that they're doing the right thing are the ones that are going to opt out. So anyway, Spokane went merrily along for a long time with that kind of approach. And when I started in 2014, one of the very first things that came to me was a couple demolitions in the Browns Addition neighborhood. And the neighborhood council basically said, okay, we're tired of this. We don't want any more demolitions of historic resources in our neighborhood. We have to get serious about a local historic district. Like, tell us what that is, Megan, and how we do it. And it was hard because we didn't have a really good process for it. So basically what happened was one of our city council people, it was her district, and she did a like surprise moratorium on demolitions in the neighborhood while we were going to do a rewrite of our historic preservation ordinance, which was basically a way to create local historic districts. So that was not a fast process, but it did happen. We rewrote the district over, or the ordinance over like a year process, then had to go through all the, you know, rigmarole of plan commission and everybody else in city council. And then we had a new ordinance, which is what our ordinance looks like today, which I would say would be a good model in order to put something into your ordinance to create an overlay zone. So basically what that did and what it said was, for historic districts, we have different provisions. So you create a boundary, you write a nomination. So the good news is in Millwood, you have a big National Register historic district. So you can use, you know, history. The history doesn't change. Maybe your period of significance changes a little bit. I'm not sure when the Millwood district period of significance ends, but if they were done a long time ago, they usually used 50 years, you know, so it might be 1930 something, maybe 1940. Now we're in 2025, so you could go all the way up into our 2026. Weeks behind. You could go up all the way up until the 1970s if you wanted to include other properties that may have been sort of left out of the National Register District, if maybe there's some mid-century things, you know, 1950s, 1960s that are interesting as well. So anyway, off on a tangent. So what the ordinance said was, in order to create this district, you have to have a vote of property owners. And so basically, we created a balloting system that allowed for the city. When we wanted to get pretty far. We wanted to have a nomination written. We wanted to have, you know, every property within a district is contributing or non-contributing. So all of that would be all spelled out for people to know, what am I voting on? In Spokane, we also require design standards and guidelines to be written for each district. So they're very specific to the district. I'm almost rethinking that. Like maybe that wasn't a great decision because we have several districts now, local districts, and we have to create separate design standards and guidelines for each one. It's good, I think, for the property owners, but they are like 100-page, books that talk about every aspect of what we would be looking at. Windows, doors, roofs, porches, all of that stuff. So each one, and you can see them all on our website. So I would encourage everybody to look at them. Yes.
Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt.
Yeah. No.
Great
Yeah.
flow.
Yeah.
But are we talking about exterior? So is it
Exterior,
just the
only
look?
exterior. And for historic districts, in our ordinance, it actually says street facing facades.
Just street facing.
Yep, just street facing. I think that's a little bit more palatable for people to hear that. And it's also good when you're out there talking to the community because you can say, the only thing we're really worried about are your street facing facades. Because that's what is at the public right away. That's what the public's going to see. If somebody's putting an addition on the back, we may review it, but we may not bring it to the whole Landmarks Commission. Now, we have professional staff, and not that you guys aren't professional, but you're probably not historic preservationists. So, you may be looking at more things at the commission level than we do. We take care of a lot of it administratively so that it doesn't come before the full Landmarks Commission. But basically, yes, street-facing facades. So we have those documents all created. We have them out there for, on our website. It sounds like you guys have a website. You could have them out on your website for people to review. And then what we do is we actually create, everything is hooked up to our GIS system, our mapping system. So we can pull all of the names and addresses of the property owners because the property owners are who gets to vote. And I'm not sure here in Millwood if you have much for rentals in your district. I'm just assuming that that's what we were talking about for a first historic district would potentially be where the Millwood district is. So I don't know if it's, it doesn't really matter. But the point is you want it to go to the property owner because that's who votes. So if, you don't want to just send these ballots to the address because you might have a renter in there and they can't vote. So basically we send off the ballots. We actually do put the specific, we use a mail merge and we use the specific owner, their address, the parcel number. And then if somebody owns more than one parcel, they get more than one vote. So that's how we do it. If somebody owns a empty lot and 3 properties, they get 4 votes for the district. So we would list those parcels out. If it's just one, it's just one. We have a yes, no, very clearly spelled out. Yes, I want the district to, be created. No, I am not in favor of the district. The other thing, yeah.
Districts, a combination of business and residential, or is it just residential?
It could be anything. Okay. Just you kind of keep it broad in your description. It's just a historic overlay zone. So it could be a commercial district. It could be a residential district. We've only done residential so far. Hilliard, we do have a business district. So it is commercial buildings. That one was done back when we did the Corbin Park neighborhood in that kind of time frame. So that was still requiring people to opt in. So even though we have a national register district in Hilliard for the business area, there were, I think, 27 properties that were included within the boundaries of that national register district. At first, only 12 property owners opted in and signed a management agreement. So it was really not a district. You couldn't call it a district. Since that time, we have probably added another 6 or 7. So now maybe 18 of the 27 are part of the district, but they're not. It's not really what I would call it a true historic district. But you can have commercial districts as well. We're actually working on a CLG grant that we got for the Garland neighborhood next. So that's this year. So that one will be a commercial district and won't include any residential. And you could mix it together. I mean, you're a small town, so it might be a mix of both. It just has to be spelled out in the nomination, what the significance is of this neighborhood, including commercial. It makes it a little more complicated on the design standards and guidelines because you're not now just looking at homes, now you're looking at commercial properties. But since there's just a handful of types of commercial properties, you probably don't have to get too deep into that. So anyway, so we send out the ballots. So the most recent one we did was a neighborhood called the Cannon Hill Park Historic District, about 200 properties surrounding Cannon Hill Park on the South Hill. So you start out with 200 no votes because just think of it that way. We send them out into the world, and unless they turn them back in, that's going to be considered a no vote. Our attorneys were very, very hesitant to say, if you don't send your ballot back, it's a consent, it's implied consent.
I would love that.
When I was actually the CLG coordinator for the state, that's what I used to say. I used to tell communities, oh, you should put that, if you don't return it, that's on you, that's implied consent. You didn't care enough to send it back with a no vote. That's a yes. But my attorneys in the city of Spokane did not agree with that. And they were like, those are all no votes and you have to dig your way out of that hole. So basically, yes, at that point, we have always relied heavily on the area that the district was being formed in. We are your regulators. We're sending this out. We are not the proponents of this district. You are. You have to knock on your neighbors' doors and make sure people return their ballots. So 60 days is what we generally have given to owners to return their ballots. In that time, we have also learned some things like to help out our neighborhood folks that are the volunteers in the neighborhood. We have created two separate databases. One that actually is like a confidential one with the actual votes of the property owners, and the other just have they returned their ballot or not. And so during the period of that 60 days, maybe every couple weeks, we would send, they would request and we would send back our spreadsheet of who has returned a ballot, so that without telling how they voted, so that you know who not to have to bug because they've already returned their ballot and who still needs to be bugged. So that's just something we've learned over the time, that it's better just to create separate things so that when somebody asks for, if you want to really be by the law, you can ask them to do a public records request. But since we've created this, we don't really make people do a public records request for it. Yes.
Were there any meetings held to kind of inform the public?
Oh, yes. So during the time that we're kind of creating the nomination document, and we also create something called resource forms. So every property gets a couple photographs, a description, year built, if any information we sort of know about it. And those are all on our website as well for each district we've created. So people can know what, they can look at their own property and say, oh, okay, well, you got that wrong. Because we want to ask people, maybe that year built is wrong from the assessor's website. And so all those resource forms are out there. So we do definitely have an initial introductory meeting before we've done anything. But we also ask the neighborhood to make sure that you have support for a local historic district. This is a big undertaking. It's not something you want to go into just hoping people will be interested. You want to make sure that there is, that you have support for creating this. So that is the important kind of initial meeting to even gauge whether or not people want this to happen. So if you feel like you have enough, then we usually have about 3 or 4 public meetings. The Cannon Hill Park one was more of a neighborhood initiated endeavor. So I would say a very much grassroots effort. They were very lucky. They had an architectural historian who lived in their district and who was willing to write the nomination for them. Yeah, without charging anything. They had actually a good friend of mine lived there who moved up from Denver, didn't want the same thing that he saw happen to his neighborhood in Denver to happen to his new neighborhood in Spokane, and immediately started asking me, well, how do I create a historic district in my neighborhood? So he retired from Facebook, so he's got plenty of time and energy to devote to it. So he went out and did all the photography. They really had some really good folks that lived in their neighborhood that could devote a lot of time and energy to it. That's the only one that's happened that wasn't a city. And we are not not the proponents, but we did get grants for Brown's Edition and for the lower South Hill, called the Cannon Streetcar Suburb Historic District. That's a 500 property district that we wrote the nomination. We got a grant to do that work in-house. Brown's Edition as well. We got a grant for that. So basically, lots of neighborhood meetings. We helped them with our neighborhood meetings, but we weren't we were the informants, I guess, of what a district meant, what it didn't mean. But the neighborhood really gets those together. So yeah, lots of public meetings, because that's the most important part is you don't want people to get a ballot in the mail and not have any idea what this means. Yeah. And also, several of these, so like Brown's Edition and the lower Cannon Hill, or the Cannon Streetcar Suburb District, those have a lot of rental units, a lot of multifamily, a lot of apartment buildings kind of mixed in with some single family. A lot of them are owned by landlords rather than, their investment properties rather than homeowners. So each of those neighborhoods sort of came up with their own way of contacting property owners that didn't live in the city of Spokane, that maybe lived in California or someplace else, to try to inform them early about what was going on, because they probably weren't going to be participating in the public meetings. They might just not want this. I was surprised at how many out-of-town landlords actually voted in favor of districts in those places, because they care about the money. They care about their investment being protected. And so that is, for them, they could see that this was a way to protect that investment.
Well, and also the renters aren't likely to make any changes because of the cost.
They can't, right, exactly.
They can't.
For sure.
Yeah.
And that's why renters, it's good for them to be informed about this happening, but at the same point, almost more so to convince their landlords to return their ballots. That is how some of those neighborhoods said, hey, I know you're a renter, but you should contact with your rent check, you should enclose something saying, hey, we're really in favor of this historic district. I mean, they would tell people, we wouldn't do that, obviously, but the neighborhood can. Once you get past the vote, because that's kind of the big part, that shows what the interest and involvement is of the neighborhood. So in Spokane, we, just because of where our ordinance lies, we then have to take it to the Plan Commission, which is not the most fun for me, because Plan Commission is all about housing, building housing wherever. We shouldn't be putting extra protections on neighborhoods, because that might just keep housing out, even though we always say we don't change the underlying zoning. If you have an open lot or a vacant lot, you can build infill, and you can build it to whatever you're allowed. If you're allowed a 4-plex or a 6-plex or whatever, you can still build that. The only difference is now the Landmarks Commission will review what that property looks like, so that it is not an intrusion into a historic district. We want it to be compatible with the historic district. So that's really the only change. Do they ever hear me say those words? Of course they do not. It is always, you're drawing boundaries to keep people out. And we're saying, no, we're not. We're trying to protect the historic part of Spokane that makes Spokane what it is. We understand density. We understand housing is needed, but we also understand that just a little bit more process might help what that looks like, and also help those property owners who live there and have bought in there to protect their own investment. So we go through the Plan Commission. We usually have to have a workshop or two. They've done it a couple times now, so usually we can get away with one workshop and then one public hearing. And that, again, is a place where we need a groundswell of support from the neighborhood to come and testify to Plan Commission, saying, yes, we want this. Yes, this is our idea. And yes, we understand that we're putting some constraints on our ability to change our properties, but at the same point, that's what we want. And you have to know too that you're also, by having a historic district, all contributing properties within that district are eligible for special tax
Oh,
valuation.
that's what I was gonna,
Yeah.
my question is, what,
So, yeah.
how do we let the property owners know what's in it for them?
Yeah. So, I mean, and it sounds like you have a few, like you've done some brochures, so maybe you use that as kind of a basis to create. And I have a little historic district sort of one pager that I'm happy to share that you could use for your district. I mean, it might be for Rockwood Boulevard, but we don't have a local district in the Rockwood neighborhood, but I've talked to their neighborhood council many times. So I have a little initial here's what it means, here's what it doesn't mean, and I'm happy to share that with you guys so that you'd have something to look at. And it does talk about incentives are available and things like that. But that's the important part. It used to be the argument. I'll tell you, 10, 15 years ago, the argument for historic preservation was pretty easy. It was a property rights issue. I don't want anyone telling me what I can and can't do with my own property. That's really was the biggest argument. That is not the argument anymore. I mean, that might be a small part of the argument, but now we're sort of, it's weird to be in a profession where really the argument against you has changed significantly. Now it is really the YIMBYs. Yes, in my backyard. Housing for all. Don't put any restrictions or regulations on housing. Housing has to come in. And so preservation is looked at now as a very, not that it wasn't always a little bit of a NIMBY tool, not in my backyard. What's good for you? Yeah. Oh yeah. Housing's great. I just don't want it, behind me. So this argument has really flipped around, and now sort of these YIMBY folks are much more against preservation, looking at it as a gentrification and keeping people out and rich people tool. So it's really changed this whole argument, and it's weird to see it. And very progressive people. So a lot of state laws have happened in the last couple of years on the progressive side. That are trying to get rid of preservation, trying to get rid of districts, trying to get rid of design review because it takes too long. I think a lot of it is targeted on Seattle because Seattle has a design review board that is very, I think, notoriously hard to work through, and projects can get stuck in this design review for years in Seattle. It's not the way it is in a Spokane or a Millwood. I mean, we're not out there trying to hold you up. We're trying to get you through the process as fast as possible as well. So we have managed, thankfully, through some lobbying at the state level to have carve-outs for local historic districts or locally listed properties that still will require design review. But they have really, there's been a drumbeat against preservation from both sides. It's very interesting. So yeah, it's weird. It's like it is a change. So anyway, so you get through Plan Commission. In Spokane, Plan Commission is just a recommending body to City Council. So even though we've had a lot of consternation and a lot of teeth gnashing on the Plan Commission side for all of our districts, our 3 districts that we've created in the last couple of years, they have always recommended passage to City Council. And of course, the Landmarks Commission has always recommended passage to City Council. And we have obviously, we've passed all of our historic districts. I think the best part of it is really that we can always fall back on the vote of the property owners, and that way council and your voted in representatives realize that this neighborhood is in favor of this. This is something they want. Who are we to say that it is not? The Landmarks Commission or the Historic Preservation Commission's job is to say, does this meet our historic, our ordinance? Does it meet our criteria? Of course, this is going to meet, your criteria. Plan Commission is looking at it as a zoning thing because it's an overlay zone. As long as it's in your code that allows for that to happen. And if your comprehensive plan says that historic districts are something you should, or the historic feel or neighborhoods or whatever your comprehensive plan says, we hammer very, very hard on that with the Plan Commission because our comprehensive plan has a whole half of a chapter on historic preservation and talks about districts. So we always throw their own comprehensive plan heartily at them, oh, we're meeting this goal, we're helping you meet that goal, we're helping you meet this goal. So it's a lot harder for them to sort of talk around the comprehensive plan. So anyway, that's a little, that's kind of what we've learned over the years of sort of using their own tools in our favor. So they would be hard pressed to vote against it because we are meeting their goals. So so once it gets through all of that, obviously there's a vote at City Council and the mayor signs it, and then we have a historic district. So the most recent one just came to be in play on Christmas Day, actually, this year. So, but we have, as I've kind of mentioned a couple of times, so we have 3 of these larger historic districts. So Browns Addition is about 300 properties, Cannon Streetcar is about 500 properties, and the Cannon Hill Historic District is 200 properties. So that's a lot more properties to manage. And so we have everything flagged in our GIS system. So any outside permits, we get notified and we let them know that they have to get a certificate of appropriateness before they can proceed with getting their building permit. So I'm not sure how you all have it. Your property's flagged, but you only have 3 or 4. So it's easy, it's small enough where you could be like, oh, the Rosebush house wants to do something on the exterior of that property. We might need to do a certificate of appropriateness for that before we can issue a building permit. It's harder when you get a lot of big districts. So, so luckily GIS works really well, flags those properties. They can't pull a permit. They can't pull a permit online without coming to us first. So that's sort of how and honestly, the biggest thing we get are roofing permits. Lots and lots of roofing permits because we do, just review those. They're easy to review quickly, and we just do that administratively. So we don't bring those to the full Landmarks Commission. So really, we're not taking any, if contractors or property owners are worried about how long it might take to have something reviewed, we can say, well, if it's administrative review, like a window on the back of your house, one window, or really we wouldn't be reviewing that necessarily for a historic district, but we do look at roofs. We don't do paint color. We do paint color on individually listed properties in Spokane, but not in districts. And we give that as an option to property owners. So when we're creating those design standards and guidelines, we ask, do you want us to regulate paint or do you not? Thankfully, they have all said no, because paint is such a subjective thing. And it's frankly the easiest thing to change. It's still expensive to paint your house, but, over 20 years, it will be painted again. And more than likely, there will be a different owner, and they might, if you have a purple house, they might change that color. So anyway, we have just seen that property owners are not really interested in looking at paint color, thankfully. But I will say another thing, and this just goes toward that plan commission and the housing and all of that, is that accessory dwelling units, so ADUs, building something in your backyard, a garage with an apartment or something like that. We in the Cannon Streetcar Suburb Historic District and in the Cannon Hill Historic District, we do not review those. Those are just reviewed under their regular building permits because they are behind the properties. If they are not attached to the property. If they're attached to the property through a breezeway or something like that, we would review it. But if they are separate and behind, we are not going to review them. That is a way to sort of give a comfort level to property owners that want to do that in the future, but also to the Plan Commission and City Council that we are not trying to stop any density. We're managing density in a different way. Browns Addition did want us to look at garages or ADUs in the future, so we do review those in that neighborhood. But that's kind of why it is nice to have separate standards and guidelines for each district, because it gives people sort of an ownership over what they want in their own district.
So those could be residential?
Oh yeah, they mostly are.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they are. Almost all. We started with Browns, and we've kind of used Browns as the basis for all the rest of the districts, using pictures and examples from the district, the district that they are that's being considered, I guess. So we take out the Browns Addition pictures, we put in Cannon Streetcar Suburb Historic District pictures, and change it a little bit if they're, like for the ADUs. removing that as something that is reviewed by landmarks. And the guidelines are sort of nice because they are not the regulated part, but they give your property owners direction on how to choose this. So even though we don't regulate paint color, we have a section about paint color to help them for guidance purposes that are not regulated, but it is guidance. So it is a bigger document for that purpose. Like if you're thinking about changing these, and like things like, so let's say that they have all their original wood windows. Windows are such a big deal, and so we might say something in our guidance that says, yes, we're only going to be reviewing what's on your front of your house. However, think about this before you think about putting vinyl windows on the rest of your house. Do you want mismatched windows in your house? What is the idea? Like just think about that before you decide to do that. Like we're not going to let you put vinyl on the front of your house. So we don't say the words no vinyl windows. What we say is they need to be paintable windows, which kind of in a way takes out that.
A lot of the local window manufacturers are very sensitive to the historic value, as I found a few years ago. So they were like more than happy to keep the wood look with a better product.
Right. Some of them are like now they're doing like a fiberglass. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I know you certainly, Alex, have some thoughts about windows, I'm sure. Yes. They're a little bit better than vinyl. And one of the things that I just think it's so interesting, and I guess I've just been in the historic preservation realm for so long that people, maybe it's somebody that's thinking about putting their house on the register and they say, oh, well, yes, we have replaced the windows, but they're the same. They're in kind, and then you look and you realize, well, they're internal plastic grits wedged between your double paned vinyl window. It doesn't matter that they're in the same configuration. That is not an in-kind window replacement.
So as long as people know to ask.
Yes, for sure.
Is there any historic blah, blah, blah?
Yes, yes.
Then a lot of times the provider or the vendors will step up. So.
Yeah. We have had a lot of problems in Spokane with like Home Depot selling windows to people in historic districts and not, and then they've already ordered the windows. And then they realize when they're coming to pull the building permit that they have to have approval from us. And so we finally, we got to the point where we figured out who the permitting company was. So it was just like some company in Bellevue that was doing all the permitting for Home Depots all through Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. And I got the guy on the phone. It's just a very small shop, but I kept seeing the same name coming over and over. And I'm like, when are you going to like start to realize that you should contact me very first when you see one of these windows? Like, it's an old house, like call me because we keep getting in the same place where you keep telling me, well, they've already been ordered. And I'm like, no, that's not an excuse. Like we're not going to play that game anymore. So finally talked to the owner of the company who completely understood, explained to them all of our districts are on our website. Please, in Spokane, before anybody issues a window permit, look and see if they're in the district. Stop, do not order. Stop and start the permitting process first so that it'll be caught, and so we have not had a single other problem with that since that time, which is great. So yeah, I mean, so there's those kinds of things, but they were terrible. It was terrible. Every time I'd see this person's name, I was like, oh no, it's going to be another vinyl window permit in one of our districts. Yeah.
I also wondered how much communication do you have or can you have with realtors?
Lots.
So,
yes, that's a great
you can
question.
Jump in and
so I have a dear friend that works for a realtor, so she's connected to the MLS system, and so she set up some searches for me. So like I'm a client, but basically that covers all of our big historic districts. And so every time a house goes on the market that's in one of the districts, I'm basically informed, and I now have a kind of a cut and paste email that I send out to the realtor. Because now I see who the realtor is and I say, hey, congratulations on the listing. This is in a local historic district. So I talk to them about the incentives. this is great. You have an incentive, this is a contributing property. I usually take a snippet of the resource form so that they can see what we've written about the property. And say, this is a contributing property. This is what it means. So for when you're showing this property, you can inform folks that this is in a local historic district. If anyone has questions, they are more than welcome to contact me directly. You don't need to be the expert. I just want you to know that this is in a district. So that's how we were trying to do that.
Good.
Yeah. And then like every year we will send out a full like postcard to one of our historic districts. Like we can't do it every year. We don't have much of a mailing budget. So we will send out a postcard and say, just remember you're in a historic district, for any of these kinds of changes, you're going to need to get a certificate of appropriateness before, and just, send that out every couple years so you try to catch new people that have moved in. Some of the neighborhoods are really good about knowing like, hey, there's some new people here. So, maybe we need to mail them something, if one of my landmarks commissioners happens to live in the Corbin Park neighborhood, he will say, oh, we have a new neighbor here. You might want to send that letter out. So I will do that. So I try to stay on top of it as much as possible. It gets a little unwieldy when you're talking about 500 properties. It's hard for me to keep track of all of that. But now that I have kind of this system with the realtors, I have a little bit better. I also go and talk to the realtors. I've done a lunch and learn with them a couple times. Like, I try to hit them once every year or two. Yeah, and so they're always interested, and I consider them my little foot soldiers. And so if they're thinking that when they see something's listed on the local register, they don't look at it as a, oh no, they look at it as a, oh good, yes, like I'm trying to turn that around into something that's very positive for them to be able to use as an asset rather than a liability. So, anyways. That's a lot of information I've thrown to you, but we do. So I guess I would say that the end of the district is, the nomination is like you would for a house, basically, but obviously much more involved. But then what we do at the City of Spokane, since it is an overlay zone, it's a change to the zoning map. So we do have a map that is linked in our ordinances. So we actually create a new ordinance for each district. It's just a little section of our ordinance, and it has the Secretary of the Interior standards. So those 10 basic standards are within each of those. But it also has a link to the map. So somebody could go on our website or on our municipal code and be able to see the map that is the overlay zone. And it's on the official maps of the City of Spokane as well.
So a couple questions.
Yeah.
One is that you would recommend that there has to be interest from the neighborhood
Yes,
first.
there does. You don't want to be doing it to them. Yeah. That's, it's just, it is
you have to
just
know
a
it's
fun-
a possibility, but then
Yes.
do they support it or not before you go any
Yes.
further?
Yep.
And then I'm guessing that you're writing CLG grants.
We
to help
did for so this is again, and this just because I'm here and we're talking. So we did write grants for Brown's Addition and the Lower Cannon Streetcar Suburb Historic District because they were in very historic neighborhoods that have taken on a lot of density. They're very close to downtown. And we felt like there might be threats to those properties because of the need for housing. We didn't want to see historic buildings be lost for new housing. That was kind of our argument. Now, a place like the Cannon Hill Park Historic District, that is not a threatened neighborhood as far as I'm concerned. Rockwood Boulevard, not as threatened. We politically will not seek grants for those neighborhoods. We will, be information from the city. We will run it through our city processes. We will still do the balloting for them and all of that, but we will not write a grant for that because it would solidify the argument that we're protecting rich neighborhoods where predominantly white people live, and we don't want to do that. So we have really tried hard to do things like ask for grants for to list a couple properties that are for underrepresented communities. And we wrote those in-house. So we've done that. We've also done a grant for a survey of the East Central neighborhood, where I loved what you said about that you're taking history that's not necessarily a building or something, but it's kind of the stories of the neighbors. that's what we did in the East Central neighborhood. We called it a cultural study, not a historic preservation survey, where we were looking at each property and saying, oh, well, the windows have changed, the siding has changed, because you know what? That was a redlined community. They couldn't get loans to improve their homes. They couldn't, they were basically stepped on by the federal government for a long time. And then, by the way, they brought a I-90 through the middle of their neighborhood and separated it. So we looked at it as these houses are boxes of stories. What are the stories? So we literally found immigrant stories and Black stories and Asian American stories that are, part of Spokane's development. And that's what we focused on. So we really created more of a cultural context than we did an actual historic preservation where we look stuffy and elitist. We did not want that. So
is there like a boundary?
There's a boundary. We still did, and we did almost 800 properties in that boundary. And we took pictures of all of the properties, but we did further inventories of about 15 or 20 where we really dove into the stories, but then we told the overall story of the neighborhood through the context, through basically the report that we wrote.
And that's on the website?
It is.
Okay.
It is. East Central. Yeah. It's under our projects, I think. So that is the direction we try to look for. Neighborhoods that we would potentially get a grant for in the future. Peaceful Valley might be something. West Central, where there is a large historic district there of almost 1,000 properties. It's a national register district, but it's not a local district. But those are places that, again, are not going to be looked at as elitist sort of rich people neighborhoods. And I'm just being real frank with you guys. That's just something we have said for ourselves is just politically not the direction we're going to go.
Because we have an opportunity here because we have the historic district over here with the older homes and I'm sorry, elitist.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But then we have these other homes with acreage that were the workers. Like a lot of these are the managers of the mill. These are the workers.
Yes, you've got the mill story. I mean, to do a district or do, even a multiple property nomination where maybe they don't have to be contiguous to each other, but maybe it's the mill story of Millwood where you've got the plant and then you do seek out those individual properties that tell that story.
Because I know there's some interest, not only is there positive interest, but there's also a negative interest that we're always left out.
Right, of course.
Nobody cares about us,
Yes.
So it would be so great to go, ha.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that having the argument against by projects you have done is really good. And maybe it's not even a district to start. Maybe it is a survey of the mill, a survey of the mill and how it developed this town. I think would be super interesting, and not
just this.
Everybody expects that.
Yeah.
So you do something different.
And we have quite a few homes that are not built in the 30s, the 20s and the 30s.
Don't you have cinder block houses? I got some cinder block houses.
Yeah, Seth Woodard's house was a cinder block.
Oh, okay, yeah. Really, that was moved.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Got my wires
yeah. No, I mean, I'm sure you're right. Interesting.
Yeah, so that would, because we're really building on community health and community, connections.
Yes.
How important they are. We're also encroached upon by just beyond the border of Millwood is a 64-unit apartment house that has destroyed Empire. There's cars up and down the street because they didn't allow for parking. There's a 2-acre lot that we fought against. They were going to put 17 tiny homes on there. And our little group fought against that. But now it's just this empty lot, and it's just kind of the black cloud over what's going to happen because of this housing pressure for housing.
Yeah. Yes.
So to include them or us in the overlay would be, it would accomplish a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I guess what I encourage and I hope you take away a little bit is it is very political. So you have to be savvy about how you talk about it. I mean, and I'm not saying you have to trick anybody, but it is important to sort of have that story, to tell that story. So I think that's brilliant. Where maybe not the expected is the first,
And does your grant money go to a project director or manager and then administrative costs?
Yeah, for us, because we have professional staff, we do it in-house. So, I'm the historic preservation officer, and then I have a second full-time employee who is the historic preservation specialist. So a big part of what he does is the grants. So like he's writing the Garland Historic District grant, and he wrote the Cannon Streetcar Suburb Historic District grant. So we do it in-house. So basically we just get the money, and obviously he tracks his time to that to meet. Yeah.
Your office.
Right. It's
as
part of our
opposed
office.
To contracting with.
I will
individual-
say though,
that-
before
Are there resources out there
yes,
though that
some, not much over here in Eastern Washington, and getting fewer as people retire. The consultant pool is not great. But we did, like when we did Brown's Edition, I didn't have a second full-time employee. And so I certainly I did that through a contractor. So we hired a consultant to do that work, which I would assume would be the same thing here. So we have a list of consultants. But for a bigger project like a historic district, you may be able to get somebody from the west side, like Katie and Spencer Howard, so the Northwest Vernacular. Yeah. Great. They actually have done some more recent work in Spokane, so they have been willing to come here and do projects.
I think Katie's family or parents?
Yes,
are
as
still
well as
here?
Spencer. I think Spencer's sister is here too.
Okay.
And so there's a good reason for them to come. So it gives them kind of a little bit more, like, oh yes, I'll do a project in Spokane. There's also a consultant who is he was like I think he worked for BLM or something for many years, but he is now his own private consultant company, and he now lives in Montana, and he's overwriting a nomination for an apartment building in downtown Spokane. So, and he's great. So there are getting to be some younger consultants that are willing to work in Spokane, but kind of the ones that we've had here are really leaving the pool. So we have a very light pool, but yes, that's how you would do it. Yeah, to get a grant. Yeah.
Any last questions or comments?
No, I was very interested in the cultural overlay, because one of the things that fascinates me about Millwood specifically is how many first generation owners still occupy their homes,
Oh,
or the
really?
descendants of
Yeah,
the first generation
yeah.
owners.
Multi-generational.
Yeah, or even two past grandfather's house.
Yeah,
that's
and how
interesting.
common that is, just even among
Wow.
the houses that were built in the 70s, 60s, 50s.
Right.
And I think we're the third owners of our house, but it's still Sally's house.
Yeah, right.
Um,
At least that's how everybody in the
Yeah.
community refers to it.
Yeah, and so I think there is. To me, that's something that's very intriguing about this area is the stories of each house, and how we have such a rich opportunity to capture those stories
Yeah.
with the people who are descended from the original owners.
Yeah, and it sounds like in some ways maybe that is a more modern way to look at maybe a first project rather than jumping right into a district or an overlay like that, is to do some sort of a cultural survey first. And then you're now the community, because you're going to have some community meetings. It's maybe to have some of those meetings. All that will just, that will improve your visibility to the community as well. And then you start talking about historic district. You get your 3 or 4 individually listed properties on the register this year. You start to kind of build that momentum. A district is not easy. It is not an easy process. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like when we see another one coming, we're sort of like, oh gosh, no more. I mean, really, it's a lot of work, but it's worth it in the end. But it is a lot of work, and I think that there are maybe some more incremental steps and things that would be great things to bring the community together.
And tap into that pride.
Tap into that pride, and then start talking about historic preservation and the importance of our community. And so you answer the question of why are we important through that survey, and then it's protecting that importance.
We have a newsletter that goes out irregular times, and we could solicit stories, like just call us and just just speak into the phone and record your stories, or just follow up with questions.
We had in Spokane during the time that we were doing the East Central Cultural Survey, the library sponsored a archives day, And it was bring your photographs from your time in the neighborhood, bring your stories. They had an oral historian there. They had somebody from the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture. They had a scanning machine, so they called it Scanning Day. So they were capturing, these photographs that highlighted the neighborhood, but also the stories that went with them. And so it was a way that people could kind of preserve their own family histories in this day-long event that was put on by the library, and it was really successful.
Well, the fact that we have a centennial coming up, I feel like that could really leverage.
Oh my gosh, yeah, Scanning Day. You start to talk about. I mean, So we had a table there as well, and sort of showed what we were doing in the neighborhood.
Chris had a great incident where prior owners came up with photos of the house.
Just sent me a Xerox copy out of the
Yeah.
blue, like,
Yeah, and that's and believe me, I get a lot of that. I get a lot of postcards that get mail, old Spokane, things, or just photographs. And sometimes they don't know exactly where they came from, and I always tell people we're not an archive, but we might, be. If there's something that we think is important enough, we will give them to the. Otherwise, we'll keep them in our office and put them in our files and stuff. So, yeah. But anyway.
thank you so much. And don't feel you need to rush off, but I know one of our commissioners is getting ready to leave. So we're going to officially close up the meeting.
Thank you so much.
Of course, yeah.
So the next meeting, now there's no longer conflict with Annie's teaching schedule. We can go back to our regular schedule, which would be the second
Christmas and
Monday
Thanksgiving. Are you kidding?
afternoon. Is that
Absolutely.
So
Nice to
wonderful.
meet you. Good.
On Mondays.
so Mondays?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we'll make sure that we send out the packet ahead of time. And
So what would do we know what the next meeting date would be?
I believe it's February 9th.
At 2?
yes. All right. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
My move to adjourn. You want to second it?
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Yes. We stand adjourned.
Thank you.